Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. As Jaswinder Singh pointed out, when you saw the video that was played very earlier, that was 27 years ago. It was made 2 years ago on the 27th anniversary. And when we played that in Trafalgar Square in London, lots of non-Sikhs, for the first time, started to understand what had happened in 1984, in both June and November 1984. Jatinder Singh, who's the next speaker, is going to talk in detail about events around the genocide in 1984, but I'm going to give you a slightly different context. The context is this: the two events, whether it be in June 1984 and November 1984, although they were linked, they were very different. In June 1984, the difference was that Punjab was sealed. It was sealed to the media. There was a media blackout, and it allowed the Indian government and the paramilitary forces to do what they wanted, not just at the Golden Temple. And that's often the myth. It wasn't just an attack on the Golden Temple complex, but a number of gurdwaras, many historic gurdwaras, but actually gurdwaras in individual villages. And even to this date, no one knows the extent to which young men, particularly young men, the ages of 15 and 35, disappeared. So not only did you have the media blackout, you actually had orders given to the paramilitary forces to largely eliminate the Sikhs and eliminate young Sikh men. So if there's a big difference between the events of June 1984 and November 1984, is there couldn't really be a media blackout following the killing of Indira Gandhi. We had the world's leaders there for a funeral, and yet in the streets of Delhi and actually many other cities throughout India, Sikhs were targeted. They were identified through voting lists. The similarity between the two events is both were pre-planned. The June event was planned many months before, and it was aimed on a day when the government knew there would be many pilgrims at the Golden Temple complex, because it marked the martyrdom of the fifth Sikh Guru, Guru Arjan Dev Ji. So you can see how the events of 1984, whether they be June 1984 or November 1984, was an attempt by the Indian authorities to eliminate the Sikhs, to teach the Sikhs a lesson. This is the language that was used at the time. These are phrases that were used by politicians. And I think having those two events so close together, first June 1984, ordinary Sikhs throughout the world, there's about 1 million Sikhs that now live in Europe, a very large number that live in the UK, followed by Italy, and followed by countries like Spain, Portugal, Germany, France. People in the diaspora, some were living here before 1984, and all of a sudden this impacted on them. Some had chosen to give up their identity. They'd removed their turbans, they'd removed their hair. But the events of June 1984 brought it home to them. The heart of their faith was being attacked. And all of a sudden, people changed overnight. People started to keep their hair, keep their identity. And so it's ironic that the two subjects we're talking about are not only the genocide of 1984, but also issues relating to our very identity. And so what you had was the diaspora all of a sudden saying, hold on a minute, what's happening here? There's a media blackout surrounding June 1984. Young men are being eliminated in village by village. What can we do? I won't go into the detail of what happened in the preceding years, but there were people amongst the Sikh community that said, well, perhaps the government were justified. There were people inside the Golden Temple complex, they had arms, and perhaps the government had no option. But that wasn't the case with lots of other places of worship throughout Punjab. This was not the case for villages throughout Punjab. Also, why was it necessary to send in tanks and artillery? Why was it done on a very important religious festival? I think ordinary Sikhs, particularly Sikhs abroad, felt this was quite deliberate. And the fact it had been pre-planned, and that's emerged in the months and years that followed. But then, within months, on the 31st of October, when Indira Gandhi's own bodyguards, and this is very important, I've been questioned many a times by the British media of, can you justify the actions of Indira Gandhi's bodyguards? And my response to that is, these were people that protected her. But they felt so hurt about what had happened in June 1984, the very heart of the Sikh faith had been attacked, that they decided to take action themselves. And the two bodyguards, one was called Beyant Singh and the other one Satwan Singh. And this is a story still to be told, was when they shot dead Indira Gandhi on the 31st of October 1984. They laid down their arms because they felt that she had given the orders for the attack on the Golden Temple, to send in tanks and artillery and kill innocent men, women and children. What then happened in the preceding hour or so? Beyant Singh was shot dead after he laid down his arms. Satwan Singh was also shot, but survived and was later sentenced to death. We will never know the story of Beyant Singh. But the point is, what then followed was the systematic killing of Sikhs, not only in Delhi, but something like 130 different cities and towns throughout India. And sometimes it's often said the Congress were the main culprits. I would say the evidence, if you go back to 1984, was the Congress and the right-wing Hindu party were equally blamed for both events of June 1984 and November 1984. And the fact that voting lists were used to identify individual homes, the fact that kerosene, tyres, arms were provided to those mobs, the fact that Sikh soldiers, Sikh policemen, they were told to stay in their barracks. And those killings happened almost 29 years to this date. Those killings that happened over a series of days. They were very much promoted by politicians. Politicians of those days, and they are still politicians, and some are ministers. The media had its role. The media put out messages, blood for blood. Important personalities, Amitabh Bachchan, which even non-Sikhs may have heard of the name. This was their language. They were encouraging the mobs to attack Sikhs. The estimates of those killed, they vary enormously, from several thousand to 30,000. And I know Jatinder Singh will probably say a bit more about some of those statistics. But the point is, 29 years later, those politicians, those people in senior positions of responsibility who were present and encouraging the mobs, they either remain as ministers or close allies, largely of the Congress party. And that's what hurts the Sikhs. And so the final thing I wanted to say before Jatinder Singh talks is we organised this event very close to the event of the 1st of November. And on the 1st of November, a petition of 1 million was handed to the UN Human Rights Council. And there was an estimated 10,000 Sikhs in Geneva on Friday. Many of those here were probably there in Geneva as well. Geneva, I think, has one Sikh family. The next nearest Sikh family live about 30 miles away. People travelled from across Europe, from America, from Canada, from Australia, just to simply be there to show unity and show a sense of hurt 29 years later, and almost an appeal to the United Nations that there have been 10 commissions in India, but we've not seen justice. But we equally recognise, whether it be the European Parliament, the EU member states, or our individual countries from whichever country we're from, not just in the EU, but in Canada, America, Australia, where large numbers of Sikhs live, that we need to be saying to politicians, we will appeal to you because we elected you to represent us. And those feelings of the diaspora 29 years ago are as strong today as they were 29 years ago. Because, if anything, the feeling's actually stronger. Because our own media, we have 2 channels here, the Sikh channel, may have 3 channels here actually, Sangha TV and maybe Media Punjab. These are taking the message to the million Sikhs watching television in Europe. And for the first time, some of those young people that weren't even alive in 1984 are seeing those images, those messages, and they're asking those questions, particularly young people, because they regard the countries they live in, the countries they were born in, and they look to our governments. I'm from the UK. My government is the British government. But each one of us has a role to play. And each politician from whichever country also has a role to play to speak up. Speak up for those people that have no voice. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you very much. I've just heard the last bit. I haven't heard the all that's been said this morning. But it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Sarah Ludford. I'm Liberal Democrat, member of the European Parliament for London. And so, of course, I am proud to have a lot of Sikh constituents in the whole of Greater London. They are, I don't know what proportion of Sikhs in Europe live in Greater London, but a significant number. And so obviously for me, the welfare and justice for Sikhs is a constituency issue. It's not a matter of foreign affairs. And so I welcome the fact that you're having this conference in the European Parliament. It is the right place to bring issues not only about justice and human rights and non-discrimination for Sikhs who are European citizens and residents, but also, of course, because Europe in the world, and indeed the Foreign Affairs Committee in this House, is discussing this afternoon a draft report about the EU's record on human rights internationally in last year. And so it is very much part of the mission of the European Union to uphold human rights around the world. And that includes, of course, tackling impunity for crimes against humanity, war crimes and genocide. And I think the EU has a reasonable track record for doing that. And I think it's absolutely crucial that you do try and lobby the UN Human Rights Council, but also try and get EU pressure behind that to get accountability for what happened in 1984 in India and the failure to tackle and get justice and accountability for that and bring those responsible to justice. So I am pleased to support your bid in Geneva with the impressive number of 1 million signatures to pursue this issue at the UN. Of course, if things worked properly domestically, and I'm not saying this just about India, there would be accountability within the country, just as I would like to see accountability within the UK on a different subject, but I believe that the story of UK complicity with extraordinary rendition, secret disappearances and torture in the last decade since 9/11, there has still not been accountability for that. And ideally that should happen at home in the UK, but sometimes if you don't get justice at home, you have to go outside and get external agencies to try and put pressure on. Just because I don't want to ask two opportunities to speak, but I also care passionately about the equality and dignified and fair treatment of Sikhs in Europe. And of course that comes up particularly around issues of respect for Sikh tradition and religious requirements around dress in particular, and the turban and the khalsa and the kirpan. And I have been able to work in the quite considerable time that I've been a member of the European Parliament to try and support the recognition of the particular requirements for treatment of Sikh Europeans of Sikh religion. And I think some progress has been made. Earlier this year, there was an implementing measure around security checks, which made clear that for people, by virtue of the headgear they were wearing, or people in other situations, for instance, who have medical prosthesis, which they cannot remove, or it would be undignified to ask them to remove, then a combination of electronic and handheld security devices should obviate the unreasonable requirement to ask people to remove the turban or other pieces of clothing that are required for religious reasons. But I understand, and I'm sure we're going to hear, that this is not being implemented properly across the EU, no doubt for various kinds of pretexts and excuses, and it's not good enough. And we've had issues in the past in the European Parliament. I don't know whether those have been satisfactorily resolved. Oh, it has. So progress, it's maybe slow, but there is progress that's possible. And I look forward to working with you to support further progress in the months to come. And the last point I would make, I would just remind everybody that with the European elections taking place next May, it is important that everybody entitled to vote should register to vote. Obviously, I'd love it if you voted Liberal Democrat, Liberal, wherever you can, but if not, at least vote, because that's what politicians do. They take notice of voters, and we are less able to take notice of people who don't vote. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Sarah Ludford. She's not only a member of the European Parliament, but I think I'm right to say she's a non-voting member of the House of Lords as well.
That's correct. It's a rather peculiar position, but I'm currently suspended from my member of the upper chamber of the UK Parliament, but in a sense, I hope that suspension continues by me getting re-elected to the European Parliament next year.
Sarah's been a supporter of the Sikh community for a very long time. I remember only a few years ago she came to the Barsi of Jinder Singh Jinda and Sukhdev Singh Sukha at the Gurdwara in Slough and spoke then alongside the Attorney General, Dominic Grieve. And they heard firsthand, and I remember, I think there's still photographs on your website of the exhibition relating to human rights violations perpetrated against the Sikhs. So I think we thank Sarah for a continued support to the Sikh community. And we must be aware of the various European institutions, the various meetings that take place regularly here. One of the groups of people we invited to this conference were those people that work in the European Commission, not the European Parliament, but the Commission, that are effectively working on foreign policy, working on issues of human rights, the death penalty. And actually they've got a working group on human rights today, and the person that's chairing it is well aware of the issues that are being discussed here today, and was actually going to table it in the meeting of the working group itself. And I think we need to do more of that to actually find out about the various working groups and committees, subgroups that meet where we can raise our issues. So thank you again, Sarah.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm actually going to speak from a different perspective. I think it's important to understand why November 1984 happened. To call it genocide, it's in a way important to understand how it's genocide. You know, we can say there were killings in England that happened, or again, I'm not from England, so I'm just using that example. We can say there were killings in England and hence that was genocide. Simply killing someone does not make something genocide. There are steps, there are processes that must happen. And on the screen right now are some of the accepted steps that should happen. So a community is identified, they're symbolized, they're dehumanized, and that's what I'm going to speak on today, the dehumanization of Sikhs. And then organization happens, polarization, preparation, extermination, and the last phase, which is denial, which is what India is in today, also happens. So let's talk about the dehumanization of Sikhs. How can one go to the streets and kill someone? I know many of us, I would assume all of us in this room, cannot leave this room and spontaneously start killing people. It's not natural for humans to do that. But there is a process that, if undertaken, the average person can perceive other people of a specific group as being subhuman. And as a result, they need to be exterminated. And that's what's happened to the Sikhs in India, and that's what's continuing to happen to the Sikhs in India, and that's why it's important that we address this issue today. 1947, India becomes independent. What made India independent? Why couldn't the British continue to rule over India? It resulted from some of the laws that were made after 1945 that recognized that people have a right to self-determination based on their linguistic, cultural, or religious identity. People can exercise that right over their indigenous lands. The Indians stated to the international community that they have a right to be have self-independence from the British. The British are treating India as a colony. The Pakistanis did it, the Sri Lankans did it, and various other communities have done it. Recently, I think South Sudan has done it. So this law exists. India said we are distinct culturally and religiously, and we have a distinct identity that and we want to exercise this right. So India becomes independent. But within that community of India, there are many other communities who have a right to self-determination. India is not one nation based on one religious belief or one language. So on the onset of India, India decides to create this one Indian identity. And it must be important to note, pre-1947, there was no India. There was no concept of an Indian identity. And after 1947, India desires to have an Indian identity. And what they decide to base it on is linguistic and religious belief. And the first step India takes after becoming independent is to deny Punjabi as a language and deny constitutionally the Sikh religion. These are the first steps India takes. Now this is again done to alienate Sikhs from their right to self-determination and to show to the world that these people have no right, so they can never exercise this right. And also, just on a side note, for many of our guests that may not be aware, during the freedom movement for South Asia, and I wouldn't just say India, Sikhs gave an overwhelming proportion of sacrifices. The British documentation shows nearly 80% were Sikh. Sikhs constitute less than 1% of a combined South Asia. That includes Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the other territories that were covered by the British rule. So this small minority was able to contribute nearly 80% to the freedom struggle. And once India becomes independent, there's this level of apprehension towards Sikhs, even though Sikhs were considered very gallant. So right off the bat, in 1947, Sikhs are labeled a criminal tribe. There's a circulum that's passed through the Indian-administered Punjab, which states that the Sikhs must be treated with the harshest or mitigated with the harshest treatment to the point of shooting them so that they may wake up to the new political realities of India. This circulum was later confirmed in 1956, I believe. You can go to the next slide out. It was around that time. It was confirmed in 1947. Again, it's on a slide in a later date. But it was confirmed that this was said. So India to this date has not denied saying that Sikhs are to be treated as a criminal tribe as of 1947. And again, we need to understand this first step creates a dehumanization of all Sikhs. It wasn't just, the criminals within the Sikh community. It was all Sikhs. They're collectively punished. The next step happens in 1950, and around that time, India refuses to recognize Punjabi as a language. Up until then, Punjabi was spoken by all of Punjab, both east and west, east being in India and west being in Pakistan. And as of 1950, they said in schools and all government communications and administration will be done in Hindi. So many Sikhs naturally objected. And it must be important to note, this happened all of India. It wasn't just in Punjab where they said this. In the south where the Tamil language is predominant or various other languages are predominant, there as well they said those languages are not legitimate, only Hindi will be used as the official dialect. But it's in the south, a religious identity was, consistent. Many Indians in the south believe or conform to the Hindu ideology or Hindu practices. So they had two ways of connecting to each other. Whereas in Punjab, we didn't speak Hindi, we don't accept Hindi as our language, and we aren't Hindus. We're a different religion, we respect Hinduism, we believe Hinduism is a beautiful religion, and those who practice it have a right to practice it, just as Sikhs have a right to practice their religion. So in 1950s, they say there is no language called Punjabi, and there is no religion called Sikhism. Naturally, Sikhs object, and actually all of India objected. South India, the Tamils objected. They said, we want to speak our language in our regions of the world, and we want Hindi only to be administered at locations where Hindi is spoken. We don't want our children to speak Hindi. We want to respect our languages. Even in the EU, like I was reading along the side here, you see the different languages. You see everybody respecting their distinct identity. So as a result of these mass protests across India, in 1956, South India is divided along linguistic lines. They acknowledge that it's a discriminatory process to make people speak a language they didn't speak. So they decided to divide up South India and make new states and realign existing boundaries along linguistic lines and respect their right to language. But in Punjab, they refused. They said that Punjab cannot be divided. We believe you must speak Hindi. There is no language called Punjabi. From 1956 to 1966, over 80,000 Sikhs court arrest. There's mass demonstrations all over Punjab. And this atmosphere is made in India where it's viewed that the Sikhs are not absorbing or, identifying themselves as Indian. They're not becoming Indian. They're just Sikhs. They're not conforming to the norms. And this contrast comes that either you're Sikh or you're Indian. And after about 80,000 arrests that happened from 1956 to 1966, finally India gives in. India says, you know what? Fine. There is a language called Punjabi. We will give you your language. We will have, another partition of Punjab along the linguistic lines. But by 1966, the environment was such that many Punjabi-speaking Hindus felt that this was not a language issue, but rather a Sikh dominance issue, that the Sikhs were being aggressive in their tactics. Hence, many Punjabi-speaking Hindus stated that they speak Hindi, not Punjabi. And this shows the level of dehumanization of Sikhs. After the mass arrests, after media coverage of Sikhs not accepting Indianism, there was this disconnect between Indians and Sikhs. So we come to 1966 when India or Punjab finally gets a Punjabi-speaking state, and India, after nearly 20 years of existence, recognizes the Punjabi language and says, yes, fine, there is a Punjabi language. We'll give you your governance. Now comes the issue of religion. To date, India refuses to recognize Sikhism as a religion. They state in their constitution that all Hindu religious laws will be applied to those that conform or identify themselves as Sikhs. And even court rulings in the Indian judicial system states that this is basically defining Sikhs as Hindus. So our religion is now legally defined as something that it's not. So from 1966, after we received Punjabi as a language, the Sikhs come together. And they said, there's many grievances that we have. Our religion is not being identified. We just got the ability to speak Punjabi, but as a result of this ability, this right that was inalienable, but now we got it, there's a complete, transformation of our image. We are now viewed as enemies of India. We are viewed as not accepting Indianism. Our patriotism and our loyalty is now under question. So the Sikhs decide to put forward a resolution. They said, let's politically resolve this. We don't need to go into mass demonstrations. We should first document everything that we have that's of issue to us and find a political solution. So in 1970, the Sikhs put forward something called the Anandpur Sahib Resolution. This addresses all the grievances, and it states that, these were the promises made to Sikhs pre-independence. These are the issues we're having, discriminatory, laws that don't allow us. And on stage are the resolutions that were in the Anandpur Sahib resolution. But these are the things that we find of concern. You don't hire us into positions of authority. You've implemented this strange policy that denies us military service. You say the military must be representative of the Indian state. And since Sikhs are only 2% of the Indian Union, only 2% of the population of the Indian army must be from the Sikh community. So you see all these discriminatory policies that the Sikhs wanted to address in it. And they also address the fact that we want to have our right to practice our religion and not be called Hindus. Again, we want to make clear, we're not saying there's anything wrong with Hinduism. It's been often misrepresented that Sikhs are against Hindus. No. We acknowledge that Guru Nanak came from a Hindu family, just as Jesus Christ came from a Jewish family. But just as Sikhs are not Hindus, is the same way Christians are not Jews. There's no one better, there's no one worse. We're different, and we have a right to practice our differences freely, irrespective of which nation state we're in. When the Anandpur Sahib resolution was put forward, the Indian government and Indian media, and again, it's important to note at this point in history, in 1970, India was well aligned with the Soviet Union. They believed in the non-alignment movement that was pushing forward Soviet concepts. And they had a system there of state-organized media that propagated the government's viewpoint. So in 1970, India was more similar to a Soviet Union-type state with state-controlled media, state-controlled banks, and state controls everywhere, than it is, say, similar to a democracy, even though, or a free market democracy, as it proclaimed itself to be. So in 1970, the Sikhs put forward a resolution trying to find solutions to the problems and grievances they were facing. The Indian administration took that resolution and called it successionist. And then they propagated it to the mass Indians that if the Sikhs had this resolution implemented, they would break up the Indian Union, and as Punjab was the breadbasket of India, India would fall into famine, and this would be a direct threat to you, your livelihood, and your families. So you see this dehumanization of Sikhs. You see in 1947, we're called criminals. You see in 1956 to 1966, when we want to speak Punjabi, we're called anti-Indian and not accepting the Indian values. And you see in 1970, we are perceived as a threat to the Indian Union and the livelihood of the average Indian. And this constant stream of Sikhs as a threat to India is propagated from 1970 to 1984. In 1978, there is an attack on Sikhs. The perpetrators of this attack are not tried in the state of Punjab, they're moved to a different state. No one is found responsible, and when Sikhs again mass protest, they're called violent. They're called a threat. They're called, we need to take care of them. This constant message of we need to take care of them, we must teach them a lesson to live in India. And by the time 1984 comes around, there's such hatred and there's such distrust of the Sikhs that the average Indian was able to kill a normal Sikh with little or no thought. Because that average Indian at that state thought, the Sikhs don't want to be Indian. The Sikhs want to break up India. The Sikhs will jeopardize my family's livelihood and my child's future. And the Sikhs now, again, the two Sikh bodyguards had assassinated Indira Gandhi. They stated that the Sikhs are a violent people that must be collectively taught a lesson. And as a result, we see these atrocities against Sikhs. And now coming back to the present day, this process of dehumanization of Sikhs still continues. We see media constantly portraying Sikhs as violent, as uneducated, as alcoholic, substance abusing people that need to be, led, need to be informed. You see different media reports constantly saying Sikh terrorists, Sikh extremists, Sikhs abroad. And it's important to note that India still has thought criminals. Colonial laws made by the British in regards to, the right to exercise your beliefs, they're still present in India, and these are under the sedition laws. So each of us in this room who advocates international law for the right to self-determination, and I think in the UK, Scotland will recently, or next year, I think you guys are going to have a referendum, whether Scotland wants to be a part of the UK or not. Those thoughts are illegal in India. You would be called an extremist, you would be called a criminal, a terrorist, and you would be charged under sedition laws. So India constantly portrays diaspora Sikhs as extremists and terrorists, and this image is still being propagated to the average Indian, to the point where they don't know. Sikhs only represent 2% of the Indian population, or less than 2%, so our interaction with the average Indian is little to none. So they don't know what's happening. They can only read that information, and it's a present threat to our community. At any time, this hate propaganda being circulated in the Indian media can erupt in anti-Sikh, they call riots, but we say anti-Sikh sentiment. We saw this recently on August 15th, 2013, when a small dispute between a Sikh family and an Indian family erupted with the Indians coming in masses to attack the Sikh home. The police were present. At the end of the attacks, which the video is on YouTube, you can see who is aggressing against who. At the end of these attacks, 8 people are shot. All shot victims are Sikhs. How could it be that the police shoot at the very community being visually attacked? So I just want to, again, wrap up. I see I only have 2 minutes. The dehumanization of Sikhs is one of the leading aspects that we must study in how the Indians were able to kill us and why the Indian government propagates this. Genocides don't happen overnight. The Jewish community did not fall victim to genocide in Germany as of 1933 when Hitler came to power. It was a process, a systematic process that takes place, and we must highlight this process to inform our Western colleagues so that they understand what has and is happening in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Jitendra Singh. So went into the history and certainly shared some of the political history and some of the strategy from an Indian government perspective. That this isn't just an immediate reaction off the back of some events that happened around Amritsar in 1984. It has a long history, and this is a struggle that we're fighting, and this is why the struggle is so difficult, is because you're up against such a huge, now global power. I think Vinji Baji is going to share a few comments from Keith, who joined us earlier.
All I really want to say is Keith Taylor from the Green Party is obviously here to join us, show his support for the various issues we're discussing here today. I just wanted to share with those, not only in this room, but those throughout Europe that would be watching this on television. The Green Party from the UK has, for many years, had 2 members of the European Parliament, Jean Lambert and Caroline Lucas. Caroline was then elected as a Member of Parliament in Brighton, and we're more than happy to have Keith representing the southeast of England on behalf of the Green Party. But the reason why I wanted to share some thoughts about the Green Party in the UK was following the attack in June 1984. The Green Party was probably the only political party that passed a resolution which remains valid to this day, that actually Sikhs should have a separate homeland. And that's something, I know the Green MEPs, not just in terms of self-determination, but in terms of human rights issues, has been very supportive, not just on the events of 1984, but also the issue of Sikh identity. And Keith was saying earlier that he's a member of the Transport Committee, and one of the issues they're going to be discussing this afternoon is about the right of of passengers at airports. And I think if we think about the star issue, and we've also raised the issue of the Gurban, because when several years ago the new regulation on aviation security came out, the downside of it was the searching of turbans. But on the plus side, actually the rules were relaxed. What the rules say is you can now take with you as a passenger knives, scissors, up for a blade length of 6 centimetres. So now passengers are allowed to carry knives, but Sikhs aren't allowed to carry their article of faith, the Gurban, which is just very strange. We tried this with the Department for Transport in the UK with large numbers of Sikhs that live there, and say, can you say something specifically to airports and to security staff that Sikhs, provided they have a Gurban which has a 6 centimetre blade. I know Amrik Singh here, who works at Heathrow Airport, people that work at Heathrow Airport are allowed to wear that 6 centimetre Gurban. So in a sense, this was just extending it to passengers because of various risk assessments that have been done, saying that actually a 6 centimetre blade doesn't pose any risk. So it's ironic that you can take a knife now, you can take a Swiss knife with you on board a plane, but you can't take a Gurban. And that applies to the whole of Europe, so it's not just the UK, but the UK is the one area where we've explored this with the government. And so we look to Keith as a member of the Transport Committee to perhaps raise some of these issues about the Star and the articles of faith. That's probably enough in terms of Keith. I know we're very short of time, and I know another member of the European Parliament from London has joined us and was here with us last time as well and sat through the entire conference and hopefully learnt many things.
Hi, thanks.
Comments are very interesting to me, and I'll be looking into that. Thank you.
Thank you, welcome. We're now going to move on to the second section of the conference, and this largely impacts, I believe, everybody in this room today. And also what is very important is the people who can help us overcome these issues are also in the room today. So, I mean, this issue impacts everybody in terms of how we as Sikhs carry on in everyday life, how we travel between European countries, and how we go to school and work within Europe. What's also very important, and one thing we should note, is that I think historically we've kept these issues to ourselves, and we have conferences in Gurdwara, and we talk about these issues, and we have protests, and this is the heart where we actually can drive change. And I think in the UK over the last sort of 10 years or so, we've got more involved in the political environment, certainly in the UK government, and built stronger relationships with the UK government. So effectively, you're getting involved at policy making and policy outlining, so we can actually raise these objections as British citizens and as Sikhs to say this policy actually is discriminatory along these grounds, to avoid them becoming law and to avoid the Sikh community having to gather and having to protest against them. I think what we need to do now is mobilise more in Europe. We have a growing and large Sikh community in Italy, in Germany, in France, where we are seeing these issues. I think what we need to learn more, and this is the second conference we've held, and we need to sort of continue this, but also to all my colleagues in Sangat here who need to take back and really reach back out to their MEPs. And the point was mentioned by Sarah very well, that next year is the European MEP elections. So it's the ideal time, and it's also going to be coming the 30th anniversary of 1984. So it's a very important time for Sikhs across mainland Europe to really reach out to their MEPs. And this is a one-to-one relationship. We don't need to be aligned with a Jathebandi, you don't need to be aligned with a Gurdwara. It's you write to your MEP as a citizen and a constituency person. So you should all, from here, and certainly what some of the MEPs have shared, is reach out to them, write to them, invite them to these types of conferences, but start to build a relationship with them that you can, when you do experience discrimination, as we'll go through some of the expense, that you reach out to them, that you actually tell them first before you then tell yourselves and your friends and your families and Gurdwara, etc., because they're the ones who can do something about it. And if they don't, then we respond with our vote. That's the most powerful thing that we have as citizens, and I think we've neglected to utilise that tool. And some of the MEPs and MPs in each of your countries are well aware of that. So I think it's what we should learn from this process as we're coming to the European Parliament and hearing these things and seeing the process work and the system work is really get involved. And evidence of that is you all here today in one of the large meeting rooms, all wearing the kirpan and a kakar to start. 2-3 years ago, this was very difficult to happen. I know some of the things have been here. We've had lobbies outside in coffee rooms and in canteens in Luxembourg Square. So this is the evidence of actually getting in the system and working. So I'm now going to hand over to Payajinder Singh, who's going to go through the second section. Before we do, I think we've got one video to play.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ
I think there's a video by.
As I already said, my name is Harjinder Singh. I am a Dutchman, I'm a Dutch speaker, and I've served in Belgium in the Gurdwara in Sint-Truiden in the east of Belgium from 2010 till 2013. The first part of my presentation is mainly about the experiences that we had in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. I have far less information about the Walloon area. Okay. The first thing that I want to highlight is that in various parts of Belgium, Sikhs were, and other people that wear religious symbols are excluded from local government jobs. Luckily in Ghent, the situation has changed recently, and that was a process. It was a perfect example of what you were talking about. That was sort of a people's movement against the ban on wearing religious symbols, and the Sikhs were very much part of that. In Antwerp, on the contrary, which is like the second most important city in this country and the main harbor country, and where there's many, especially Afghani Sikhs that have settled there, local government employees in that city are not allowed to wear any religious symbols, be it the turban, be it the hijab or the yarmulke or anything like that. And believe it or not, but the trade unions are now proposing, the trade unions of all people are now proposing to introduce the same in Brussels. That would mean that in all of the Brussels region, government employees are not allowed to wear the star, to wear the hijab or any other religious symbol. Apart from this official discrimination, there is also a sort of less visible discrimination. People who apply for jobs with private companies, they are often, you know, they are interviewed and what have you, but they very often get refused for the mere fact that they wear that they have a beard, that they wear the star, etc., etc. That is always much more difficult to prove. Okay. The main problem for the community here is the exclusion from schools of children that wear either the patka, the star you can say, or the full turban. Since the 1st of September, all community schools, all schools that are run by the Flemish region, whether it be primary school or secondary school, have banned the wearing of hijabs, turbans, yarmulkes, etc., etc. Even a Catholic nun couldn't go to the school, yeah, because she wears religious symbols, and that in a sort of country that is about 98% Roman Catholic. Apart from the government schools, you have a system of free schools, and in Flanders those are usually schools sponsored by the Roman Catholic Church. Those schools could hardly ban religious symbols, but what they do is they ban the wearing of any headgear. You know, be it a cap or a hat or anything like that, or be it a turban or a yarmulke or a hijab. Before the ban was there on the 1st of September on all the community schools, there were a good few of the free schools that would allow students with turbans. But the tendency is now that because more people of minorities now flock to these free schools, that the free schools take a fright and start saying, oh, we better ban them too. So the whole tendency is that the situation is getting worse and not better. So far, and I almost dare not mention it in case I bring somebody on an ID, so far there are no restrictions in universities. The next thing that I quickly touch on, but Benedict Singh has said quite a bit about it as well, is the problems at the airports. Mainly in Italy, from Italy and Spain, we get reports that people are forced to take off their turban as part of the security check. The Benedict has already explained that there is a procedure in place that doesn't make that necessary. If these reports were to come from countries where hardly any Sikhs live, or from small local airports where they don't have all the gear that is necessary for the new procedure, we would at least understand it. But the reports come from Barajas, which is the main airport from Madrid. They come from the main airport of Rome. And both Spain and Italy are countries with a substantial Sikh population, and they should have the procedures there in place to treat people with decency and respect. I'm going to say very little about France, because my friend there on the left-hand side is going to say much more about it. There's a long-standing ban in France on the wearing of conspicuous religious symbols in education. Recently, that is, again, just like in Belgium, the situation has been worsened instead of improved. The other additional problem in France is that turbans and other religious symbols are banned from passport, identity card and driving license pictures. Now that, of course, makes no sense at all. If you take a picture of me without my turban, I don't look what I normally look like. And if I get stopped by the police, they might say, oh, that's not you. Yeah, so the rationale about that, nobody can understand. There has been 3 rulings by the United Nations Human Rights Council on the French bans, and all 3 cases the UN Human Rights Council has said this amounts to discrimination, religious discrimination, but France doesn't take any notice. And that was it. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Ok, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Je parlais juste en quelques mots en français pour dire que je présenterai la situation et la contribution des Sikhs, des soldats Sikhs en France, et 2 problématiques considérables en France, à savoir le turban sur les pièces d'identité et le turban à l'école. Mais I will just follow in English because I'm quite sure that you don't understand French, but let's go. So you saw just earlier a small video on the Sikh soldiers in France. I will just make a resume of this long history between Sikhs and France. In such way, Sikhs came in France in 26 September 1914 at Marseille Port, where they were sent directly to the front in North Pas-de-Calais and had the huge important battle which happened between the 10th and the 13th March 1950, where 6 soldiers fought and win the German position in the Flanders, which is in the north of France and Belgium. And even this history, France and Sikhs has a long history relationship, not only linked to the First World War, back to the Sikh kingdom of Khalsa Raj, led by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. He had French general, Napoleonian general, who helped the Sikh army, and also had a French ambassador in the Sikh kingdom, which is who were General Jean-François Allard. And even though there is also today some historic link in Punjab, linked with the France, such as in Kapurthala, you can find the copy of Château de Versailles, which was the house of the Louis XIV, which is Louis XIV. Beside this long history, this common memoir between France and Sikh, we have today few issues affecting all the Sikhs in France. The first issue is the star in the school. French Sikh kids cannot go to the school with the star. In 2004, the law was passed, and since this law, all the kids have to remove the star to go at school. Few kids just stopped school because they didn't want to abandon their identity. And also today we collect some story from family where some director of school asked the kid to cut the hair, which is very unacceptable for Sikhs. And also we have a few issues, for example, we have the kids like Amarjit Singh, 70 years old, who was asked to remove his hair and to keep them open like a girl, which was very not acceptable for the family, also the Sikh community. And we had to discuss with the French government to make them understand that this is an abuse of the law of the laïcité, which is improved in France since 2004, which will be also improved in Belgium next year. And about this issue, we have to be, all the MPs and European MPs and all the Sangha over here have to be aware of the 3 last decisions of UNO, which condemned France to improve this kind of law. The first decision in 2011 was about refusing the star on ID cards. And France was condemned by UNO to change this law. And since 2011, this is not changing in France. We try to lobby French MP, and we have few French MP who support Sikhs for making a change in this old law. But we also urge all the European MP to make some lobby and urge France to conform with this UN decision. Also, there is another decision in 2012, which was related to the issue on schools and refusing the star religious sign in school. UNO, again, for Bikramjit Singh, a small kid in 2014 2004 who was excluded because he stand for his identity. He refused to remove his star, win his case in UNO, where UNO said that this law was an abuse of freedom of religion, freedom of faith, and any kind of citizen, a European citizen or even a French citizen, has the right to practice his religion and to have the freedom of his faith, even at school, in public space, or anywhere. It is a fundamental right, which is also right in the European Chart. So on these 2 points, which is really a huge point in France, the star and ID card and the star on public school, we urge all the European MP to help this minority in France to make some change with the French law. Thank you very much.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. We decided to reverse the speakers and talk about Belgium and France to begin with. But I just want to give you a very short potted history of the Sikhs when they first came to Europe, largely in the 1950s and largely to the UK. We fought these battles, whether it be the right to wear a Sikh bus driver to wear the turban to drive a bus, whether it be the right to wear a turban to ride a motorcycle, whether it be the right to wear the turban on a construction site. These are all battles that were won over many years in the UK, but we still have our battles. The issue of the right to wear the turban on construction sites is fine, but actually Sikhs, and only last year a Sikh in Birmingham was dismissed because he was told he must wear a helmet working in industry, which wasn't construction sites. So we're looking to get the UK law changed, because that was clearly an oversight at the time. We still have issues around the wearing of the qada in schools. These come up regularly as an issue for health workers working in hospitals, doctors, nurses. The biggest issue we have is the wearing of the kirpan. We are allowed to wear the kirpan in many places in the UK. And I think I mentioned this last time on the 25th of June when we were last here. This is the third event we're holding this year in the European Parliament where we've been allowed to wear the kirpan. But I do have to share with you, because the one thing that Sikhs stand for is the truth. The truth is the UN Human Rights Council still prevents Sikhs from entering any of their buildings wearing the kirpan. And that is clearly a battle we have to fight, because if we go there to talk about our human rights, it's daft that the UN Human Rights Council still prevents Sikhs from wearing their kirpan. I'm going to just do one very quick introduction. Many of you that are sitting in the front wouldn't notice that our three friends from North America from Sikhs for Justice have joined us. Jasveer Singh, who is an eyewitness and lost 26 members of his family in November 1984. He's with us today. Avtar Singh and Sukhwinder Singh are with him. Just to reflect on the experiences of Jasveer Singh, in terms of the complaint that's been lodged with the UN Human Rights Council. If any of you want to read the 8-page complaint, it's on the 6YAST website. And it makes particular reference to Jasveer Singh and Jasveer Singh's experience. I know we've got very few minutes left, and we do want to have a Q&A session as well, if any of you got any questions, and we'll try and answer those. And just on a slightly lighter note, I know there are many Sikhs here from Germany. I think there's about 20 Sikhs that came from Cologne this morning. And they were looking forward to meeting our friends from Sikhs for Justice in Cologne yesterday. And I just want to say, one thing is Punjabi timing, but to be a day and a half late, I think that they will discuss this with you. But it was very important to point out that Jaswee Singh in particular is with us today, and is somebody that's clearly witnessed those scenes that we simply talk about, or we read about, or we see video clips about. We're going to pass, at the last conference, we passed a number of resolutions. We intend to do that at this conference, and because we started a little late, we were told, because it's the lunch hour, we were unlikely to be thrown out at 1 o'clock. So we're going to have a sort of Q&A session in terms of if anyone's got any questions they would like to ask us on either of the issues, the genocide in November 1984, or the issue of the challenge to the Sikh identity. Perhaps before I do that, I will just run through the resolutions that we're planning. We're planning 3 resolutions. In June, we passed a resolution for the recognition of the events of 1984 as genocide. And we thought it important today to modify that resolution and make reference also to the 1 million petition that was handed in Geneva on the 1st of November. The other 2 resolutions relate to the Sikh identity. The first one is in relation to France. It is ironic that in December 2008, I suspect some of our American colleagues might have been there in New York. I know I was there in New York when the cases were lodged. I know a number of Sikhs from France that were there at the time. Those cases were lodged with the UN Human Rights Committee in December 2008. And as Ranjit Singh said, in the last 2 years, we've had 3 verdicts. Firstly, Baba Ranjit Singh. Secondly, Bikramjit Singh. And the last one, Shigara Singh Man. In all 3 cases, the UN Human Rights Committee has ruled in favour of the Sikhs' right to wear the turban, whether it be at schools, whether it be on your ID, or whether it be on your driving licence. However, France, even though it's a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has not taken any action to honour and respect the views of the UN Human Rights Committee. And that shows the challenge that we face as a community. France being a country that stands up for human rights is not prepared to listen to the UN Human Rights Committee on this issue. And at the same time, we're hoping that the UN Human Rights Council will actually take out an independent investigation into the events of 1984. Well, I think India will be far more resistant even than the French. So I think that shows you the challenge we face. So the second resolution is really urging EU member states to try and explore different ways of getting that message to France, that France is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. And if a permanent member, not once, not twice, but 3 times refuses to acknowledge the verdict of the UN Human Rights Committee, then we can only urge our member states where we live to try and exert pressure on the French. I have to be honest and say the UK exerting pressure on France is probably not going to be very productive. I suspect other countries collectively may find different ways of exerting that pressure. And finally, the final resolution is this isn't just a problem clearly in France. It's actually across Europe. It's a problem in the UK to some extent. It's a huge problem in Belgian schools, and it still remains an issue in terms of airports in countries like Spain and Italy. But actually, as a British Sikh travelling across Europe, we increasingly find out things about other EU states, particularly about employment. I thought it was just the French that didn't allow people to take up public employment, being a teacher, being a policeman or woman, wearing your articles of faith. But actually, I think that's happening in a lot more European countries than we realise. I've been told it's happening to some degree in Germany, for example, as well. So that, I think it shows that actually this challenge is much greater than perhaps we acknowledge. And the way I look at it is we have the right to freedom of movement in Europe in terms of the Treaty of Rome in 1950, I think it was. So actually, as a Sikh working in the UK, I have every right to work in France, in Germany, and yet I'd be denied that right if I was taking up a job as a school teacher or a lecturer or a police officer, because I'd be told to give up effectively my faith. So those resolutions are very much around those three subjects. But it's probably an opportunity for yourselves now to ask questions. If any of you would like to ask a question, I know there's one already at the front, can I ask you just to turn on your mic and then speak?
Thank you. Sorry, I've got to go to another meeting, so I just want to get in very quickly. First of all, you're probably right, the UK wouldn't be very productive putting French pressure, but I know the EU can. And as an MEP, I'm quite happy to put pressure on France and any other country that doesn't honour human rights. What I'd like to do is maybe someone could contact my office later on today. If you're around, we could have a quick meeting, and I'll propose a question to the Commission on this. We can put pressure on France maybe that way. That would be a positive way. And the other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to look into the airport issue as far as the UK is concerned. So if we could have a meeting on that, then I can see what I can do to help you out on that one.
Definitely.
But can I wish you success with your conference? I need to go now, but we need to meet up and do some concrete work.
We will do. Thank you,
Thank you.
for joining. साथ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਸਵਾਲ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇ ਇਹ ਸੈਸ਼ਨ ਖੁੱਲ੍ਹਾ ਆ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਸਵਾਲ ਜਵਾਬ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਪੁੱਛ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ MEP ਦੇ ਅਸਿਸਟੈਂਟ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛ ਸਕਦੇ ਸੀ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ ਜਾਂ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੋਗਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੁੱਛ ਸਕਦੇ
country have an extremely small Sikh minority. So we cannot hope to obtain the same results like in England, like in Britain. How we can influence at the European level more favorable that Europe as a whole become more like in Britain than like France.
Shall I just try and answer that? We've been working on this. If I use the example of the star issue at airports, when the resolution was passed by the European Commission, clearly in the UK we created a lot of pressure to make sure it wasn't implemented in the UK. Lots of Gurdwara, members of the Sangha wrote letters, and because we had the numbers, it meant well over 100 members of Parliament received 200-300 letters each, literally in 1 week. And the government decided to back down. But the positive side to it was we worked with the UK Department for Transport and the Minister. And the Minister wrote to all 26 ministers in the other countries and said, this is what we're doing in the UK. We don't want to touch the Dastar, let alone remove the Dastar. We don't want to touch the Dastar. And therefore, we should be able to use handheld metal detectors and a swab system. And on the 5th of February this year, the EU regulation was changed. So every European country could adopt that system. So that was a very good example of how Sikhs, because they're in large numbers in the UK, could work with the UK government to positively influence the European Commission. And we've talked to the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, and he will be hopefully coming to a Gurdwara in the UK in the next few months. And one of the things that the Deputy Prime Minister wants to do is to make this an issue going into the next general election, that we should actually be in the heart of Europe, using the experience of Sikhs in the UK to actually try and not say, if there's a problem, let's help them. Let's help them solve the problem before it actually gets created in the first place. So I think we've learnt through the Dastar issue. I was saying to Keith, I think Keith has just left, but the European driving licence, this was something we lobbied on 6 or 7, even possibly more years ago, just to say, when that comes into effect, can we make sure that the European driving licence allows photographs with the Dastar. So actually we could overcome one of the problems that exists within France at this present time.
Can I just make a quick remark? I think that even in Belgium, where we are a small community, I completely agree with you, we don't have the sort of political muscle that as the UK community has. But there are politicians in Belgium that are willing to listen to us, and we have to use those opportunities. And there might be even, you live in Gatebeds, there might be a local politician of any party there that you could speak to and is sympathetic to you. Even if it's a local councillor, we have to get involved. If we don't make a noise, we will not be heard. I think it was, what was the name?
Rob Maris.
Rob Maris came with his remark, yeah, exactly. If you don't make a noise, you will not be heard. Yeah? And we can do it on European level, all of us together, but also I think everybody from whatever country in Europe you are, you should contact your local politicians, your local village politicians, or your city politicians, and your local parliamentarians.
We have another question, Max.
Yeah, I would like to say to all of you that we don't have just to talk to the politicians, but which is, I think, at least as important as talking to the politicians, maybe more important, is that we inform our fellow citizens in the countries we live in who are the Sikhs, because I live in Germany and nearly nobody knows about it there. And I'm addressing especially to my generation, because we're the first generation of Sikhs that grows up in Germany, goes to school, goes to university. And if we hide, we don't show who we are, and we don't inform the people, then who should do it? And if we do that, we show to the people they will stand behind us. And I think in most of the European countries, there's not a long history of Sikhs, especially in Germany, France. Most of the Sikhs came like 20 years ago. And so people around my age, we're the first now, and it's our duty to do something. So they see we belong to these countries.
Absolutely, and this is a very good point, because it's something I also share with that. If you look back, Guru Nanak Dev Ji took the message of Sikhi to the world, and he did it on foot in his Udasiya. We have kept it insular, and we keep Sikhi in our Gurdwara and in our homes. We've not shared what the teachings are, what the philosophies are with our fellow citizens, our friends, our colleagues, and then that extrapolates out into government and institutes. It probably is the best, Sikhi probably is the best kept secret. And we really do need to look external now from our Gurdwara, and how do we share the messages and our contribution. And we met with the Labour Party leader in the UK at Miliband, and one of the comments he made is, in the UK, we're probably the second most affluent community in the UK, so our contribution to the UK's economy as a community is one of the highest, and percentage-wise we're still very small compared to 60 million population in the UK. So we make an enormous contribution, and I'm sure with it being in our heritage that our friends across Europe also make a telling contribution, but it's not recognised, and we need to stand up and share who we are with our friends, our colleagues, students and workers, and also, as importantly, with MPs, so people actually know what Sikhi is about, what Sikhs are about, so we don't always have to beat the door down and tell them. Benji, does he talk with us?
I want to say about the Dastar problem in Belgium. I am busy with this problem long time. I want to say clarity of word religion. Indian religions are not same as it has been taught in European lands. We should make more clear the Indian definition of dharma. Our problems related with Sikh ID are due to ignorance. European people are fed up with the religious term, but to a Sikh, Sikhism is a way of life containing the moral values like Naam, Japna, Chardi Kala, Sarvada Pala, service of humanity, worldly brotherhood, etc. This could be done only by educating these local people, by doing lobbying more and more. Thank you.
Thank you, Reggie. I think we have a question from
I'm from Heathrow, UK. I just want to supplement some of the things that have already been said, especially regarding the turban issue and the turban issue. We had a real good experience at Heathrow. In fact, we found numerous ways of educating the local authorities there. And the main thing is that I found out that every airport, they have religious prayer rooms. It's called multi-phase rooms at Heathrow. And I think the best option is to if you join them with their prayers, whether they're Christians or Muslims or Jewish, and that way you can get into the meetings and start educating. And I've also got like a separate ID just to show my presence there. So there's all these things we can start doing at different main airports throughout Europe. Everyone has the right to practice their faith at the airports, to pray. So even if we distribute vodkas, or even when we have functions like the Saki or any other function, we can, for example, we got a Shabil coming up next year. We will distribute free drinks and ice creams and so on. So there's numerous ways we can do that, and Heathrow has a good example.
I just want to add, I know Max raised the issue of Germany. Yesterday I met a very elderly German woman at the Cologne Godora who's disabled. And she, I think, is a regular attendee at the Godora. And she was actually telling me about some of the challenges that the Sikhs face in Germany. But she's also somebody who is literally in touch with Professor Devinder Pal Singh Bhulla's wife on a weekly basis. And she did send a message, because she is disabled and couldn't join us. She said, a lot of Sikhs don't know that actually Professor Bhulla suffers from epilepsy as well. I know Sarah's still here. The case of Professor Devinder Pal Singh Bhulla, I think we've had at least 2 resolutions in the European Parliament specifically mentioning Professor Bhulla and the death penalty. And I think we shouldn't forget every time we come back to the European Parliament that Professor Bhulla, Balwant Singh Rajawana, and possibly Jagtar Singh Hawara face imminent execution. And I say that because we don't know, the next time we're here, we could be talking about those executions, because there are elections coming up in India. And to hang a Sikh for some votes is very easy for politicians there. But the worry is, and we were talking to a quite famous journalist, Ajmer Singh, who's currently visiting the UK and will be moving on to Canada and America, is his own belief is that all 3 will be hanged before the next election. And what this means is there will probably be ordinary Sikhs in Punjab and other parts of India that will probably express their feelings. And no doubt, many will be shot and killed and put in prison. So this is very much a live issue that's going to happen in the next year. And we shouldn't forget about those issues that we've raised at the European Parliament before.
Open up to any questions from our MEPs and assistants who've thankfully stayed with us and heard anything you guys want further clarity on, or any questions you have.
Thanks so much, Sarah Ludford from London again. I just checked the jet, it's long, but as far as I can see from the Transport Committee this afternoon, regarding National Airport Security, it's something about passenger rights, reviewing the passenger rights, which is about the compensation for flight delays and so on. Can you just clarify that? Because I would try to get my voice represented if there was an item on airport security. And just to finish off by saying I'm always pleased to take up these issues. I think it's absolutely right. One of the strong reasons for the UK to stay a very I think in some areas it's not perfect by any means, but in equality and non-discrimination, we actually do have quite a good story to tell, which we can contribute to helping change in the rest of the EU. And I'm delighted to hear that my party leader, the Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, Nick Clegg, has offered to support that. And I would love to accompany him on his visit if it's tonight.
Sarah, just on those three issues, yes, the debate is about passenger rights. I don't think Keith went into the details of exactly what that meant, and we were just saying, well, this is about the rights of passengers as well, but it's about the wearing of the turban or the kirpan. In terms of the UK being at the centre of Europe, I think that's the sort of discussion we had with Nick Clegg when we met him earlier this year on 26th of March, and then follow-up meeting in July. And I think, Sikhs have worked with all the political parties in the UK, and these are issues that cut across the political divide. But actually, we do believe on these issues, we do need to be at the heart of Europe to influence Europe in a positive way, just like we did on the Star issue, rather than be at the periphery. So we very much look to, and I think Nick's going to actually make those public commitments with our media present. And we will let you know it will be a Gurdwara in the north. We've already fixed the venue, just looking to fix the date. And similarly, we shared yesterday on Sikh Channel that Ed Miliband's also going to be coming to a Gurdwara in the Midlands. And again, we're hoping in the lead up to the general election that all the political parties will actually be taking up some of these Sikh issues. And I'm hoping by the time we get back to the UK, even David Cameron would have issued a message on Bundi Shore Divs, which we raised yesterday at Cologne Gurdwara, just to highlight some of our history and what our gurus did for freedom and the freedom of others.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I would like to ask a question on the behalf of Mr. Resham Singh from Germany. He wants to know that we have some honorable MPs present here today with us. How they are helping us in the European Parliament on the problems we have discussed today. He wants to know about how they are helping us.
In terms of the role of, the role of MEPs, I know Sarah's probably the only MEP in the room, and I'm sure she will add to this. But the first thing we need to do is raise these issues with members of the European Parliament. And one of the things that we emphasise to yourselves is the UK has 73 MEPs from memory. There are over 600. Germany has the most, 99, because the size of the country, etc. And this time, I think we've had MEPs from the UK again. We've had representatives from, I think there was an MEP from Poland, where there probably is a very small Sikh community. Last time in June, we had MEPs from Italy that joined us as well. So I think part of it is we need to raise the issues with MEPs, not necessarily coming here, but actually in our own countries. But I think because the MEPs also are parts of political groupings, there are things that the groupings can do, whether it be the Green Party, the Liberal Democrats. We've had the resolutions in the past. We've also had action taken by Catherine Ashton, who is the person responsible for foreign affairs. She met the Indian Foreign Minister on the 30th of January. We were here on the 21st and 22nd of January. And currently, the trade agreement between the EU and India has been negotiated for around 7 years. And Manmohan Singh was due here in February this year. And one of the first clauses of that foreign trade agreement is human rights. So I think it's our duty to raise the issues of the death penalty, which we have done, the issues of November 1984 and the fact that we still not have had justice. And I think these things do make a difference, because Catherine Ashton is somebody that passionately believes for human rights. There are the resolutions I've talked about, And as we've heard from one of the London MEPs, often it's our fault that we're not talking to them and meeting them and telling them about our issues, and they will find ways of trying to raise those issues here in Europe. And often, when resolutions are passed here, they're sent to every government in terms of the member states in Europe, saying this resolution has been passed in the European Parliament. I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to add more in terms of what MEPs could do.
I don't think so. I mean, I think it is about increasing visibility and in the way that you're doing, but I absolutely agree with you. It's about liaising with contacting MEPs in other countries. Generally, you mentioned it's absolutely true. They've got this number of MEPs, and so you know, we don't want just the same old voices like me and British MEPs, because this is a pan-European issue. And we can ask parliamentary questions. We can do what are called written declarations, which are home in the UK as something called an early day motion. We can try and put wording into reports on things like the India trade agreement. I mean, you know, the normal parliamentary channels. We can ask questions of Ashton. But also within the EU, it's a combination, if you like, of EU law, like on security screening, and national law. So it's about raising issues at both national and European level. So there's probably no one sort of magic solution. It's about doing what you're doing, which is running campaigns and getting together and running petitions and so on. And I think you're doing it very effectively, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. I'm just going to add some Punjabi in Punjabi for some call. ਸਵਾਲ ਇਹ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ MEP ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਕੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। ਪਹਿਲਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ MPਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਹੁਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਦੂਜਾ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਆਪਾਂ ਡੀਟੇਲ ਵੀ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਭੇਜ ਦੇਈਦੀ ਆ, ਲੈਂਗੁਏਜ ਵੀ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਲੇਟ ਕਰ ਦੇਈਦੀ ਆ। ਹੁਣ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਦੇਖੀਏ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ UK ਤੋਂ MP ਆਏ ਹੋ ਆ, ਆਪਣੇ ਜਰਮਨ ਤੋਂ, ਫਰਾਂਸ ਤੋਂ, ਇਟਲੀ ਤੋਂ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਹੀ ਦੱਸ ਦਿਓ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਕੁ MEP ਆਏ ਹੋ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਕੁ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਜਵਾਬ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਹੁਣ ਗੱਲ ਤਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਹੁਣ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੰਨੀ ਦੂਰੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੰਨੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਖਰਚ ਕਰਕੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ ਹੋ ਆ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੀ ਆ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਇਸ ਬਿਲਡਿੰਗ 'ਚ ਹੀ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ। ਹੁਣ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਇਹੀ ਸਿੱਖਿਆ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਸਾਲਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਉਹ ਆਉਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ। ਉਹ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਕਿ ਚਲੋ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਨਾਮ ਬਹਾਨਾ ਬਣਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਆ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਦਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਆ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਪੇਅਰ 'ਚੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਪੇ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ 'ਤੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਖੜਨਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਵੈਂਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਆਰਗਨਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਅਸੀਂ ਅਗਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਿੱਠੀਆਂ ਪਾਈਏ, ਫੋਲੋ ਅਪ ਕਰੀਏ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਉਣਾ। ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਮੈਂ ਆਉਣਾ, ਮੈਂ ਐਡੀ ਦੂਰੋਂ ਆਉਣਾ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਟਾਈਮ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਆਓ, ਘੰਟਾ ਵੀ ਕੱਢੋ, ਅੱਧਾ ਘੰਟੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਸਿਸਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਓ। ਪਹਿਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਆਉਣ। ਜੇ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਸਕਦੇ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੰਡੀਵਿਜੂਅਲੀ 1-on-1 ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਰੱਖੋ, ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਫੋਟੋਆਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਖਿੱਚਣ ਆਉਂਦੇ, ਨਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਸੁਣਨ ਆਉਂਦੇ। ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਣ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਦੁੱਖ ਕੀ ਆ, ਸਾਡੇ ਦਰਦ ਕੀ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਾਉਣਾ। ਇਹ ਸਾਡਾ ਹੱਕ ਬਣਦਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਕੰਮ ਪੁੱਛੀਏ ਕਿ ਕਰਦੇ ਵੀ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਨੈਕਸਟ ਹੋਣਾ ਵੀ ਕੀ ਆ। ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੱਦਣੇ, ਫਿਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਮਸਲੇ ਮੋੜੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਨਾ ਹੱਲ ਹੋਣੇ ਆ। ਤਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਕਿ ਅਗਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰਨੇ ਆ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਰ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਸੱਦੇ ਦੇ ਕੇ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਫੋਨ ਕਾਲ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਟ 'ਤੇ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਮਿਲ ਸਕਦੀ ਆ, ਪਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਬਣਦਾ। ਅਤੇ ਆਖਰੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਮੈਂ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਬੱਬਰ ਜਰਮਨੀ ਤੋਂ ਬੋਲ ਰਿਹਾ। ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਪੁੱਛਣੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ MP ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜਰਮਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਏ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਇਹਦੀ ਲੇਟ ਮਿਲੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਗੇ ਤੋਂ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ 'ਚ ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ, ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਇੱਕ ਕੰਮ ਆ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਚੰਗੇ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੀ ਗੱਲ ਰੱਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਜੇਕਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸੁਨੇਹਾ ਮਿਲਿਆ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਆਉਂਦੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੂਜੀ ਵਾਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਜੋ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਇਸ ਵਿਸ਼ਿਆਂ 'ਤੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆਏ ਹਾਂ ਅਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਜੇਕਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਵੀ ਜਰਮਨ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੀ MP ਉਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਹਿੰਦੇ, ਜੇਕਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਹੀ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੋਈ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਮਿਲੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਸੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛ ਵੀ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਆਇਓਵਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਲੈ ਲੈਂਦੀ ਹਾਂ। ਉੱਦਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਮੇਲਿੰਗ ਲਿਸਟ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੇਲਿੰਗ ਲਿਸਟ ਦੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਹਰੇਕ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਪਾ ਲਈਦੀ ਆ, ਪਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ 'ਚ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵਾਈਡ ਸਪਰੈਡ ਕਰਨਾ। ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅੱਜ ਆਏ ਹੋਆ ਨਿੱਧੂ ਆਪਣਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਡੀਟੇਲ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੇ ਕੇ ਜਾਇਓ। ਈਮੇਲ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਤਾਂ ਈਮੇਲ 'ਤੇ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਟੈਲੀਫੋਨ 'ਤੇ, ਉਹ ਡੀਟੇਲ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਹੋਵੇ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ। ਪਰ ਮੇਨ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਹਰੇਕ ਮੁਲਕ 'ਚੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਰੱਖ ਲਓ ਪਰ ਬੰਦੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਜੇ ਤੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟ ਕੰਟੈਕਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਉਸ ਮੁਲਕ 'ਚ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਕਿ ਉਹਨੀ ਉਹ ਮੈਸੇਜ ਬਾਕੀ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਬਾਕੀ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ, ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨਾਲ, ਇਹ ਕਿਸੇ ਇਕੱਲੇ ਦੇ ਕੰਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਰੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਕੌਮ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਉਹ ਦੇ ਸਕਦੇ।
ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਤੱਕ ਯੂਰਪੀਅਨ MEPs ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਰਮਨ ਨਾਲ ਸੰਬੰਧ ਆ 99 MEPs ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ 2 ਵਾਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੱਦਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਭੇਜਿਆ ਉਹੀ ਸੱਦਾ ਟਰਾਂਸਲੇਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਰਮਨ ਦੇ MPs ਨੂੰ ਭੇਜਿਆ। 3 ਦੀਆਂ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਈਆਂ। ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ 96 ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਸੱਦੇ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਆ ਲੇਕਿਨ ਉਹ ਆਈ ਨਹੀਂ। ਇਹਦਾ ਕਾਰਨ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਫਿਰ ਕੋਈ ਅਗਲੀ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਪੁੱਛਾਂਗੇ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਆਏ ਨਹੀਂ ਅਤੇ ਗਾਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੋਈ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਹੋਰ ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੁਲਝੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੰਟੈਕਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲਿਆਉਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਕੱਕਿਆ ਫੋਰ ਆਪਣਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਵੀ ਕਾਫੀ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। ਕੱਕਿਆ ਪਾਉਣਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਧਾ ਘੰਟਾ ਐਕਸਟਰਾ ਲੈ ਗਏ। ਨਾਲੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਲਈ ਲੰਗਰ ਵੀ ਤਿਆਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਬੈਲਜੀਅਮ ਦੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਘਰਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ। ਤਾਂ ਅਖੀਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਤਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਦੇਖੋ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਿਰਫ ਦੂਸਰੀ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਆ। ਅੱਗੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਅੰਦਰ ਆਉਣ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਜੂਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਰੱਖੀ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਰੱਖੀ। ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਸੁਨੇਹਾ ਲੈ ਜਾਈਏ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਹਰ ਜੂਨ ਤਾਂ ਹਰ ਨਵੰਬਰ 'ਚ ਰੱਖਣੀ ਆ। 30 ਸਾਲ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਵੀ ਅਖੀਰਲਾ ਹਫ਼ਤਾ ਜੂਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਆਪਣੇ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਨਜ਼ਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਹੋਣੇ ਆ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਹਫ਼ਤਾ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਤਾਂ ਇਕੱਠ ਐਡਾ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ। ਦੂਸਰਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੀਏ ਆਪਾਂ MEPs ਆਪਣੇ ਮੁਲਕ ਦੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਬੁਲਾਈਏ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ 30 ਸਾਲਾ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਦਰਦ ਆਪਾਂ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਤਰੀਕ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਦਿਖਾ ਲਿਆ ਇੰਨਾ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰੀਏ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੀਏ ਵੀ ਆਹ ਕੁਛ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਇਆ ਅਤੇ ਉਹ ਕੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ। ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਬੈਟਰ ਆ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰੀਏ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਉਣਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਹੀ ਕੁਛ ਕਰਕੇ ਦਿਓ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਮੇਨ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਰੱਖਣੀ ਆ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ 'ਤੇ, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਡੈਥ ਪੈਨਲਟੀ ਦੀ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ। ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਉੱਤੇ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਜੂਨ ਅਤੇ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ UK ਦੀ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲੇ। ਅਤੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਅੱਗੇ ਦਾਸ ਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਲੋਮ ਗੋਦਰ ਵੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡੈਪਟੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਲੀਡਰ ਲੇਬਰ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਇਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਘਰ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਕਹਾਉਣੀਆਂ। ਤਾਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ, ਚੈਨਲ ਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਚੈਨਲਾਂ 'ਤੇ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿਣ ਤਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗੇ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਬਣ ਗਏ ਉਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿ ਗਏ ਆ ਵੀ ਜੋ ਕੁਛ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨਾਲ 1984 ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਆ। ਕਰਕੇ ਫੇਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਪਟੀਸ਼ਨ ਪਾਈ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਤਾਕਤ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੇ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਲੀਡਰ ਹੰਗਾਰਾ ਭਰਦੇ ਆ। ਬੋਲਦਿਆਂ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਹੀ ਬੁਲਾਰਿਆਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਖਿਮਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਹਾਂ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।